My name is Gabriella Muzsnai, representing Raise the Voices, a volunteer organization focusing on human rights abuses. In the context of the 1 in 3 Women project, we focus on gender-based violence. So I have the honor and privilege to be talking to Professor Catherine Lumby, Australian academic, author and journalist, professor of media in the Department of Media, Music, Communication and Cultural Sciences at Sydney University, gender advisor and ambassador for rape and domestic violence services in Australia. Welcome, and thank you for agreeing to meet with me today.
It's a pleasure, Gabriella.
My first question is, could you tell me a little bit about the current situation in Australia with respect to gender-based violence?
Well, we're still living with an epidemic of it, despite this being well, really, we can go back to the 19th century. Women were raising awareness about it then. But certainly in the 1970s, with second wave feminism, it was a huge issue that women were marching in the streets about rape and domestic violence. And 50 years on, we still have a massive problem with domestic violence and with sexual assault. As you say, 1 in 3 women. I mean, Australia might regard itself somewhat arrogantly as a, quote, developed country, and economically we are, but I think the index that we should measure development by includes social justice issues. And unfortunately, domestic violence crosses all walks of life and classes, and that's misunderstood. Often people think it's just some working class problem, and it's not. And sexual assault is still rife, although we are going through a bit of a reckoning in this country around gender-based violence. It's now become apparent that there's been gender-based violence in our parliament, in our high court. It happens I teach and research at an elite university, and there are elite colleges there where sexual assault goes on and has been since I was at law school. I mean, it's an open secret. So it's very important to see that this is something that affects women across all areas of society.
With the brutal murder of Hannah Clark and her children, there has been a big public outrage that has been created and has led the government to begin working on new policies to reduce domestic violence. What do you think about the current discussions? What has been successful and what could be more effective?
Well, they could fund primary services better. I mean, I think I'm afraid, and I'm not a cynical person, I'm an optimist. To be a feminist, you have to be an optimist. You've got to believe that things can change. But our current government, I think there's a lot of lip service. I have my doubts that many in the government in senior ranks get it when I'm talking about the federal government. There was a very mixed response to the allegations of sexual assault brought by a very brave young staffer, Brittany Higgins, about being raped in Parliament House. Well, that's an allegation, of course, but this was the allegation that was made. And our Prime Minister famously said, well, I went and asked my wife what she thought. And I mean, you shouldn't have to ask your wife to care about a potential sexual assault. So, I mean, what we really need to see is proper funding of primary services, trauma counselling and research-based trauma services like Rape and Domestic Violence Services Australia. I mean, there are many organisations doing excellent work in this space, but unfortunately, they're not funded properly, and we need to get beyond awareness raising and to the heart of the problem is the other thing. We need to start very young in schools, working with young boys and empowering young women to speak out. And because at the heart of all gender-based violence is basically a patriarchal construct about gender. It's a sense of entitlement that some men have. Now, we know that most men are not like that. And, most good men stand by women on these issues. But there are men who feel entitled to women's bodies and who see women as their property, women and children as their property. And you mentioned Hannah Clark. That's exactly what happened there. She left the marriage and he said, well, I'm going to take you all out. I mean, it's horrific, but there are men who see women and children as property.
And how do you think this patriarchal construct could be worked on by us as a society? Because there has been some funding. I believe this is the 4th national plan we've got going on, and somehow the results don't seem to come along. And you mentioned education and deconstructing this scheme and this idea that we have of how family works and who women belong to, or the fact that women should belong to someone. How do we start?
Well, I think we start very young. I mean, one of the things we need to work on is talking about consent. And I mean, I've got 2 kids. They're now 19 and 21 boys. And when they were about 4 or 5, this is even before they went to school, I started explaining consent to them. And I explained it this way. I said, if you see someone playing with a toy in the sandpit and you want to play with it, you have to ask first. And even if they say yes, it doesn't mean you can take it home or break it. If they want it back, you give it back, right? So there are very simple ways you can start explaining consent to young children. But I think we also need to get much more explicit about the role gender plays in society and how damaging it is often for women, but also for men, because if men and women are pigeonholed into different roles, then men don't get to live their fullest lives either. So I think we need to work hard on bringing more men along the journey with us. And there was a big debate, I think it's about 5 years ago or more, about the integration of a program called Safe Sex or Safe Schools, I think it was. And it was a program that looked explicitly at gender and sexuality and consent. And there was a huge pushback against that by conservatives in our government, saying that, we can't be, this is brainwashing children and, we're teaching them to be gay because we teach them about different sexualities or preferences. So there's this, ongoing sort of pushback on the part of religious conservatives, not all religious people, obviously, but religious conservatives, political conservatives who I think are invested in the status quo. They don't want things to change. They don't want to give up power. We've got a big problem in our workplace cultures around sexual harassment and sometimes assault. One of the reasons we need more women in leadership is women can bring a different perspective to this and actually see it as a real problem. Also, when we talk about gender, I think we need to talk about intersectionality. So we can't talk about gender without talking about racial or ethnic background, class background. These things are all in a dynamic together, and they influence how people experience the world. Yes,
and as you worked, Brittany Higgins and her case, that is very recent. In regards to the workplace violence situation, what do you think that says about where we are now, and how do you think the conversation might move along due to this outrage?
Yeah, I think, people are referring to it as a reckoning. Thousands of women marched on our federal Parliament House and said enough is enough. And that reminded me of the 1970s feminist marches. Not that I was there, I was still a teenager, but, I watched with great interest from the sidelines. And what was interesting was we saw women of different political persuasions coming together. So Lucy Turnbull, who is a very powerful woman who is married to the former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, who's a Liberal Party person. She joined hands with Theresa Rudd, who's married to Kevin Rudd, who was our Labor Prime Minister. And they stood together holding hands in front of Parliament House saying no more. So, that gives you an idea of the fact that it's a coalition now, and that, I think what is becoming clear is women are angry, we have had it, and we are not going away.
Definitely. Professor Lumby, this is all the time we have for today. If there's any one takeaway with regards to what we should look forward to in Australian politics and our scene on gender-based violence, what would it be?
Well, it would be a radical overhaul of the school curriculum. That is my hope, that we really start young with education. I'm a firm believer that we need to have explicit conversations young about gender and consent.